think Lillian, you were the one who was originally like, this would be interesting. I want to, kind of talk to Matt about the liberalism stuff. So do you want to say a little bit about what you were hoping to explore?
Well, yeah. So thanks, Ben. And thanks, Matt, for, I DM'd Matt and I was like, let's talk about socialism. So I have a series of like ambivalences about liberalism's relationship to socialism. I think my official position is that I don't collapse the two, but I think I've said on my own podcast numerous times, like we have a running series called "What is Liberalism" that we're gonna build on.
Cool.
And I think that one thing I know, or one position I also have, is that I think socialism is not illiberal. And I used to think that there was no problem with this on the left. So I used to think that on the socialist left, our position, like, that something that was shared, was that liberalism is not really the best protector or advancer of liberal rights, and that usually that has come from the left. And so one of the things that socialism would do is protect certain liberal goods better than capitalism does. And so I used to think, and this was comes along with the attachment that the socialist left has to internal democracy, to pushing beyond but defending the advances of like the so-called bourgeois revolutions, however bourgeois one thinks they really were. And like, in broad strokes, I kind of thought that was the view. And I've recently become concerned because I think once one gets a little older, and I'm not that old, I'm only 31. But I'm past the romance of communism phase, in the sense where I just like, think everything is all of an ideological piece, and in the way that I just described. And I think that I do think that there are illiberal parts to the left, and that concerns me. But that doesn't make me a defender of liberalism exactly. So I have some ambivalent views, and I'm wondering what to do about them, because I also think, I'll leave it there. Like I worry about various things with liberalism, but that kind of background concern, and just, to make it kind of concrete for people. What do I mean by the left being illiberal? Well, I think that various positions that the left holds about its own internal democracy and internal culture can be illiberal. Number one, I've experienced it many times and gotten burned. It's not a reason to like disregard these organizational forms, but there are just problems. And then number two, I think that the left has diverged from a position on civil liberties that it has traditionally held recently, and this also concerns me. And so I used to think that it was a straw man that the left is illiberal, and now I've realized that actually this exists. So anyway, sorry to take up so much time. Matt, I maybe turn it over to Matt.
Yeah, no, that's I mean, that actually seemed very concise to me. What's as much as the temptation burns in me to jump in with a bunch of stuff I think about that, I want to turn it over to our other guest. So maybe as the person here who probably out of the three people on the screen has the strongest view on this, and I'm actually, so one of the reasons this is going to be interesting to me, is because sometimes I think, yeah, Matt and I think exactly the same thing about this, and sometimes it seems like, oh, maybe it is a little different. I don't know. I mean, I
change day by day, so I wouldn't worry about it, right? On any day, we might coincide or break apart, or I might be on your side, or I might be on someone else's
I certainly
side.
don't go around calling myself a liberal socialist, but some of that's just, aesthetics. But in any case, but as the person with the sort of most strongly held position, maybe you could just kind of start us off with like a few minutes of sort of what what you mean when you use this phrase liberal socialism. How do you see the relationship between these two ideas, and then we can turn back to Lillian to get some of her thoughts about that.
Sure. Well, I just wanted to start off by saying that I'm really grateful we got to do this. I've been watching and reading some of Lillian's stuff over the course of the week. And I just want to say first off that I thought your lecture on socialist pluralism was really brilliant. And I enjoyed it a great deal. And actually, it's kind of a good segue to my own thinking about this. Because in that lecture, you talk a little bit about the romance between liberalism and capitalism and how it seems to be fraying. And that led me to the conclusion that I'm kind of in a love triangle with liberalism, capitalism, and I guess myself as a democratic socialist, where I'm the other man. And I'm trying to sit there and basically tell liberals, like, I know you two have been together for a very long time, but he's always been kind of abusive, and you just don't feel the same way with him as you do with me, right? So
this
really
is an amazing metaphor, but okay. Yeah.
No, I've been watching a lot of rom-coms lately, can you tell? But anyway, it's close to Valentine's Day. In terms of my own approach to this, I absolutely agree that I think there are ambivalences, and I'm by no means uncritical of what I might call the more possessive individualist versions of liberalism. I think that for the most part, those are regressive, and they've been a burden both for socialists and for the more emancipatory dimensions of the liberal tradition going forward. And I think one of our major theoretical tasks is precisely to try to demarcate what's integral to liberalism, especially its more egalitarian aspects, and break those off from the kind of more possessive individualist approaches to capitalism. In terms, though, of what I think liberalism has to offer socialists, and I do think liberalism has quite a bit to offer socialists, I would kind of demarcate it in three separate ways. One, I think that historically, and Marx was very clear on this, we have to appreciate the kind of influence of bourgeois liberal ideology in breaking down antiquarian views of the world that were predicated on what Charles Taylor calls a model of hierarchical complementarity. Very simply, older views of society tended to see it as more or less a pyramid, or a great chain of being was another metaphor. Everyone had their place within that, but it was by no means considered by anybody a place where everyone was equal, right? The king had more dignity than the peasants. The peasants had less dignity than the knights, all the typical stuff, right? And I think that by advancing, say, a model of a social contract, which saw society not as a great chain of being, but instead as an artificial compact between equals that people voluntarily entered into and could exit if it didn't serve their interests, liberal theory took a major advance forward in terms of its emancipatory potential. And I think that the Marxist tradition and the socialist tradition broadly carry on from this legacy. So I think theoretically that's important. The second thing that I think is important that liberals have to offer socialists is what Irving Howe talks about in his essay, Liberalism and Socialism, Articles of Conciliation, which my friend Sean Gooday at Jacobin recommended to me, and I think is just a seminal essay that more people deserve to read, where he points out that socialists have always been far more sensitive than liberals to the dangers to liberalism posed by concentrations of economic power and the way that this can lead to various forms of economic domination, which more Republican-oriented liberals need to be concerned with. However, right, Howe points out that liberals, for their part, have also been more sensitive at points than socialists on questions like state domination. So Howe points out that Marx, in his The Civil War in France, is quite critical of the notion of the division of powers, for example, because he rightly aligns it with this Montesquieuian idea that we want to check the democratic potential of the masses by making sure that they can't pass crazy legislation that will redistribute wealth downwards. Now, while historically that's the case, Howe points out that we have very good reasons to take seriously this idea of dividing powers. And actually, it's kind of burdened Marxism to be aligned with this idea that we should have limitless powers granted to a kind of unified state or unified state sovereign to exercise authority in the name of the people. It's had some bad impacts. And I would also argue that many of the classical liberal rights that puts checks on state power are also things that most socialists should want to value, right? Not rights to private property, certainly not extensive rights to private property, but things like rights to expression, assembly, multicultural toleration. If anything, I think the socialist position would be that we want these rights to be even more entrenched and more expansive than they were before. And then the third thing that I think it's important to note as socialists is the good Marxist point, which is that I think many leftists today are very attracted not to a kind of Marxist position on socialism, but a Sorelian position on socialism. There's this almost millenarian belief that what we need to do is radically rupture history and transition to a totally new kind of society. And as Igor Shuketbrod, who I know we're both fond of, points out in his book, that's a very anti-Marxist position, right? The true dialectical standpoint is that any kind of socialist society that we transition to is going to be, to use the term, stamped with features of the old. This is because, in many senses, the old constitutes a progression over the even older, and we don't want to throw that away in our transition to socialism, right? Now, what features those will be, I kind of mentioned that earlier on. I think it's important to divide certain kinds of powers to preserve the integral liberal rights. But I think that we need to be more dialectical in our approach to these issues than more Sorelian or millenarian socialists have been in the past. And yeah, Ben, you do got to learn to relax on Saturday. Grab yourself a drink or something, buddy.
All right, Lillian, you want to weigh in on that? Not the Saturday issue, but the rest of it.
Okay, so I think there are 3 points that I'd like to make. The first is that there is a difference between liberalism as an ideology. At least these are the points that that Matt's making. There's liberalism as an ideology, so I'm going to call that liberalism with a capital L. There's liberalism with a little l, which has to do with the kinds of constitutive norms that Matt's saying he thinks are valuable. And I tend to also think that they are valuable in that way, in the way that you described in terms of the integral parts of liberalism seem to be egalitarianism, and then against hierarchical complementarity. Yeah, and I think it's right to say that socialists carry on this legacy. And then the third point is liberal socialism. So that's the construction of a normative ideal. So there's the ideology, there's the constitutive norms, and then there's the liberal socialism. And I do wonder what the relationship between the ideology and the constitutive norms, and like all 3 of those terms, to me, there's some relationship between all of them. And what concerns me about much normative political philosophy is its sort of its presumption that you can take liberalism with a liberal L, the constitutive norms, and then project it onto the future without further complication. And I think it's like interesting that you use the word like see it dialectically. What I think would be true is that whatever those constitutive norms are, they have a certain social shape given existing material conditions, and that has some kind of direct relationship with the ideology, liberalism with a capital L. And what I hear being said is that the socialism of the future, the different material conditions, would realize those constitutive norms under different material conditions. And so the ideology part would stop being a problem. I think that's possible. But like, I think it seems too easy to me. And I wonder what you think about that, or even what Ben thinks about that. Like there is a kind of save and rescue move that is being done at the level of normative theory, and then and I feel that it's being posited that you can kind of say, okay, we can imagine a certain set of social changes, and then this is what socialism would be like. But it strikes me that like often what a dialectical position is a kind of, and this is just going to introduce the Hegelian language, is like it is a kind of immanent critique of the existing society. So one way of doing a critique of capitalism is that you take a certain set of normative principles and you just apply them, like just or unjust. Like I would think that Rawls does this. Like we have ideal theory, we apply it to non-ideal conditions, we can see that it's not just, and we want to make it more just. But it strikes me that like a dialectical approach implies a different method, which would be immanent critique. So you take the expectations and the constitutive norms of the present, and then they work on and against or through the contradictions of that present. So what comes out the other side of that might involve those norms, but might be something else entirely. Like it might be, they would be ordered in a different way. They would be understood differently. And so what worries me about the posit of liberal socialism is that if that kind of transformation is not seen as a transformation in how we understand the norms themselves, then the ideology problem comes in, like, because you start just applying liberal norms to the present, and I'm not sure how to see their movement and transformation into something else. So there is like I think there's, is my set of, is this making sense? So like all of that is true, but I think there's a kind of background method question that comes up for me when I start thinking about what it means to think dialectically at all. And what I tend to see when people adopt a liberal position, so a kind of Rawlsian liberalism or an egalitarian liberalism, is that method question tends to fall into the background. Like people tend to just assume, granted, and then like we're just going to apply the good parts and then forget about the bad parts. But like in practice, I think that there's a liberalism is more contradictory, and so I'm not that comfortable with like the confrontation with the contradictions in the present, and then the kind of speculation about what the future would be like.
You have been watching free public content from Give Them an Argument. To access every single episode of the show, the main show on Monday nights, all of the streams, all of the debate breakdowns, all of the patron-exclusive postgames on Monday nights, all of the patron-exclusive bonus episodes every week, and much, much more, go to patreon.com/Ben Burgis. I cannot resist ending this with, don't be foolish.